Hello, everybody. Welcome to this panel discussion titled In the Belly of the Beast, Organizing for Food Sovereignty in the US and Beyond. I'm not too sure how many people are on the call, but looking forward to hearing from you in terms of where you are and what's going on, how you're enjoying the conference. Feel free to post those kind of comments in the chat in this initial part of the panel. So today we have a panel made up of 3 speakers and myself that are going to talk a little bit about, discuss our experiences organizing in the belly of the beast. What does food sovereignty organizing look like in places like the US, the UK, and Canada, places where industrial and corporate agriculture has been consolidated and is continually projected onto the world? We have, of course, different struggles, different experiences in these different places that also resonate with the struggles for food sovereignty in other parts of the world. So these are not unique, but there are unique aspects of them. And so we pulled this together as a way to exchange, to think through what it looks like to organize for things like agroecology and food sovereignty, and to build alternative food networks in places, again, like the US, the UK, and Canada, how to address how to take a decolonial approach to building food systems. How do we address indigenous food sovereignty in settler colonial states like in North America? What does an anti-racist approach to food organizing look like in places like the UK, Canada, and the US and beyond? And also, what does it look like to address the colonial imperial relationship of the places that we reside and exist in on other parts of the world? What does the economic and political relationship between countries like Canada, the US, and the UK, and the global South look like, and how do we contest that, and how do we challenge that? So these are some of the things that'll be explored today by the panelists, who will again share their experiences and how to build power, countervailing power together to build food sovereignty in the belly of the beast. So I'm Colin Anderson. I work at the Center for Agroecology, Water and Resilience in the UK. But I have traveled through all of these and lived through all of these different places, Canada, the US, and the UK, and I currently live in Portland, Oregon. And I've met, I haven't met Gisèle in person, but I grew up in Canada, and I was involved in the food sovereignty movement there, and was peripherally involved in Food Secure Canada, the organization for which Gisèle is the executive director, and that organization does really amazing work in pulling people together to address kind of food-related issues across the country, and to kind of advance food sovereignty in different respects. And so Gisèle will kind of be a panelist respondent after Saulo gives Saulo, who will be the primary presenter in the first part of the session. So after I was in Canada, I moved to the UK for 5 years, and where I met Dee Woods, who's an actionist and activist working on food justice, food sovereignty issues, and she does all sorts of wonderful, amazing things. She's also affiliated with our center as an honorary research fellow. And Dee is deeply involved in the UK food sovereignty movement. She was one of the first people I encountered in the UK food sovereignty movement, where I also was plugged into different aspects of trying to organize the people's food policy in the UK, the kind of various gatherings, the UK food sovereignty movement, where again, Dee has been deeply involved and has kind of profound insights into the workings and the kind of challenges and the opportunities for the struggles for food sovereignty in the UK. And welcome Dee, who will also be a respondent. And I then met, well, actually I met Saulo at the international gathering for agroecology in Mali. I think it was in 2015. But since I've moved to Oregon and to the US, I've also plugged into the US Food Sovereignty Alliance, where Saulo was a founding member and is a co-organizer and convener of the International Relations Committee, where he also, again, is someone like the 2 respondents, has deep insights and experiences of organizing for food sovereignty, and will kick off this session here by sharing some of those with us. I think he has some slides he wants to share. And so Saulo will speak for about 20 minutes sharing these experiences. And then we'll ask Dee and Gisèle to respond, and then we'll have an opportunity to have some crosstalk amongst the panelists. But we're also gonna try. We'll see how it works to use a Mentimeter, which is a way to allow and to enable people that are listening on the other end of this panel discussion to provide some comments, and for us to check those out and try to bring as many of them into the panel and the discussion and the debate as possible. So we have an hour, which isn't a long time to discuss something such as deep and complex as the issue in front on the table today, but we'll do our best, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what everyone has to say. And please, again, feel free to add comments in the chat, and when the Mentimeter comes up, that's a great place to kind of share your reflections, questions, comments as they arise. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Saulo.
Colin, thank you so much for the invitation for us to join today. I have been asked by the National Coordination of the U.S. Food Sovereignty Alliance to represent our collective. It's a huge responsibility. I work at the WhyHunger, is an organization based in New York City. And there was one of the co-founders of the U.S. Food Sovereignty Alliance. So we are a grassroots supportive organization, and we work to mobilize resources to grassroots organizations and social movements worldwide. So today, what the task here is to present you about the history of the USFSA, and share a little bit of context and the challenges and what does it mean. So this talk is also reflect on a moment that we have experienced among ourselves, the increasing um, uh, uh, rise up of the white supremacist groups, the right wing, and the events of last week is just a reflection of 400 years of the uh, of a country based on slavery and white supremacy. So it's a nation that it has its struggles, was founded as an empire, as a country of still great disparities among ourselves, and also play as a huge role on food and ag policies worldwide. So all the decisions that we make here affect other people outside of the U.S. So this presentation is to give a little bit of a glimpse of who we are and how we organize ourselves. So I will share my slides here with you. The name of this talk is "In the Belly of the Beast," and organizing for food sovereignty in the U.S. and beyond. So our view is that I know the U.S. is necessary and urgent, and so in the content of this talk, we're gonna discuss about the birth, the building up of the alliance, and the organizing. So in the other point that we're going to explain, which is part of our reflection as a collective, is our structure, how we organize ourselves, how we define roles and responsibilities. And at the end, I'm going to explain about some more recent initiatives. So the USFSA, we is a global process inside of the US. What does it mean? It means that it is not only is a US-based collective, but it comes out of informed by a global process led within the International Planning Committee on Food Sovereignty, the IPC, which is a space led by global social movements, La Via Campesina, World March of Women, World Forum of Fisher Peoples, and many others. So we are informed by that. So in many things that I'm going to discuss here, I'm not going to be able to discuss extensively, But if you, but I recommend for you to visit our website at and access this publication here on the left about our history, and they're going to explain the 10 years of existence of the USFSA. So the USFSA was informed when after a U.S. delegation of farmers, farm workers, and organizers participated in the International Forum of Food Sovereignty in New Eleni, Mali. So from in that moment was 2007. The U.S. Is in a bit of transition, right? We had we are about to get into the elections, and then also in 2008 we had this huge crisis, economic crisis here. I'm going to explain a little bit of that context. That it shapes the direction of the USFSA. So the USFSA, it comes with this spirit of internationalism, of how to build beyond the borders, not to be only in the US, how also to bring the US into the map, because our foreign policies have contributed to isolate ourselves, people inside of the US, to the rest of the globe. And so that's one of the challenges that we have done. So and then only in Detroit at the U.S. Social Forum in Detroit, Michigan, we had the chance to come together as a people's assembly on food sovereignty at the forum, and discuss what it looks like a space that would lift up the voices of a grassroots organization of farmers, farm workers, indigenous people, and bring the conversation of food sovereignty inside of the U.S. that at that point was unknown, or was not so common conversation. So moving on, I'm gonna talk about I'm gonna offer you this context analysis, which is very short, but I want to summarize what are the contexts that we have, and we can see here on the right side, on the low, how we position ourselves in this context. So since the 80s, throughout the 20s and 2000 and more recently, so we have across a process of neoliberalism. The neoliberalism as a political project is implemented and is deepening, not only inside of the US, but globally. In the US and UK, being stronger advocates and huge players in that process. So how that affects that political project, neoliberal political project, there is an impact, right, on how we organize ourselves. So from Black Panthers, from the American Indian movement and other social movements we had, we get in a period of defeat, or what we call the reinseeding, the declining and reorganizing ourselves. So as you know, the social movements was several repressed within the side of the US. And in this period of defeat, we had the growth of the number of NGOs, the non-government organizations, the non-profits, funded by larger philanthropic organizations, but also by this policy of neoliberalism, which was to make the state smaller, like they say, and transfer most of the responsibility into the private sector, into the private life, into the hands of philanthropy. So we have this growth of NGOs, and so WhyHunger was created in 1975 in the cusp of the context, but we accompany all this moment here of the long defeat. And this defeat doesn't only happen here; it happened in many places. So, and as you can see here, as we move into the 90s, the capitalism start getting into a crisis, a huge crisis, right? The neoliberalism start not solving the problems of the people. So, and then we have the rising of La Via Campesina, the global movements. We also have the World Social Forum. That it's an expression of our global resistance, the global organizing. Also in the 2000s, we had the Iraqi war, the invasion, right? Which was based on lies, on say that the presence of weapons of mass destruction, which was not, and was only actually an important move, a geopolitical move by the U.S. and European nations into the Midwest. So look here, and then at the end of the 2000s, we have the crisis, the global crisis. That global crisis is it just was one another moment of the crisis of capitalism, right? And since then, and even more, that crisis just became bigger, and the solutions that the government, the private sector are offering are all the same. It doesn't change anything. They are saying the neoliberalism should continue, right? And then we get in the situations that we have Trump, we have Bolsonaro, we have all the things that people, the politics are shifting and responding to that position that we have to continue in the same path. But the contradictions inside of the US became so big that we are seeing now, since the 2010s, a raise up, a reorganizing of mass organizing inside of the US. And this is important to say because this is not a minor thing. This is a major victory of the organizing among communities, especially BIPOC communities, Black and Indigenous and people of color, which are the most affected, which is actually in resistance for 400 years or more. So, and then we have this moment of organizing inside of the US, which is a positive thing, which is a growth. But this is not decided yet. It's a pattern that we are seeing inside of the US, but it's not consolidated yet. That is because both sides, both of the people in power and the working people, they still accommodating, right? So the what happened last week is just one more crack in this structure that we understand as the United States, but also is a crack because of the crisis in capitalism. So the USFSA comes in that moment. You can see. So the struggle for food sovereignty became way before in 1996 as a response to neoliberalism, and the organizing decided in Mali was to branch out, to bring more people in to fight the encroachment and the influence and the control over corporations of our food system. So, I will stop here. The context analysis are big, and we can continue discussing later. The one thing that I want to bring here is that how the USFSA build up, right? How we start organizing and bringing the message of food sovereignty inside of the US, which is an epicenter of international agribusinesses, which is the beast, right? So one of the main strategies that we used, that the USFSA used, was the organize of the food sovereignty prize, which was to give visibility to the leadership and to the protagonism of people on the ground. And also to say that, look, the voices and the real solutions comes from the people who are doing the work. And in contraposition to the World Food Prize, which is led and funded by the corporations, which is more PR stunt and a defense of the agribusinesses that are generating hunger and creating more problems worldwide. So the Food Sovereignty Prize help us to do that, to bring people in and give visibility and have this moment as education inside of the US. So our organizing inside of the US is configured by the existence of our collective, which is a mix of grassroots organizations and grassroots supportive organizations. We have organized 4 national assemblies in these last 10 years. Those national assemblies are moments of coming together, building our shared analysis, and our collective identity, what brings us together in this fight. So those national assemblies, as you can see in our structure, are the main spaces are where we make decisions, because the USFSA is volunteer run. More recently, we hired a consultant, a part-time consultant, to help us in a second assessment. But throughout the history of the USFSA, the organization is volunteer run. There's no dependency on we try to cut on the dependence of foundations and funding. So in the third National Assembly in Iowa, in 2015, we decided to do an internal assessment. So we kick the tires of our collective and say, like, oh, okay, what's working, what's not, and let's have a conversation. Let's include the voices of everyone. So we did this assessment, and we decided in this new structure that you are seeing here. So they have the National Assembly, a national coordination formed by the 2 representatives for each region that we are organizing and present right now. So those regions are led by grassroots organizations. So that's one thing that we decided in this structure. We have regions working at the geographical level, at the ground level, but also our national coordination will be led by grassroots organizations. And then also in Bellingham, Washington, at the 4th National Assembly, we decided to create these 5 collectives. One is the Political Education Collective. The other one is the International Relations, the one that I helped to co-facilitate with Erica Takeo from US Friends of the ATC. There is a Narrative Change Collective that Colin participate. There is another collective called Agroecology and Land Rights, in a youth process, a space led by young people from our organizations. And more recently, we organized the rename the support team of the national coordination, called the Support Collective. That support collective was originally formed by grassroots support organizations like WhyHunger. So as you can see here, there is a definition of different roles and expectations from our members. So we have grassroots organizations who are supposed to take leadership spaces in direction. And there is grassroots organizations that are support organizations that provide the technical support, the logistical support, participate in the decisions, and we are there to contribute and participate, and at the same time also support the leadership of grassroots organizations led by BIPOC communities. So I'm gonna move on to explain to you a little bit of our recent accomplishment, which is everything that we do as a collective, as I do as a volunteer-run organization. Everything is a victory. So the first national political education course came out of this reflection that we need to build our organicity, divide up, learn together, have a time to reflect and build our organization. So we had this event prior to COVID, which was in the cusp of COVID. We are really afraid, but everything went well, and everybody got safe back home. But it was a very important moment for the history of the USFSA. We hope to replicate this political education course into the regions. And our folks are organizing that. And also the political education collective is right now working to do an assessment around racial equity and protagonism inside of the USFSA. So, which is another long struggle inside of the USFSA as a multicultural, as a diverse group of people, but also has not is the agenda of race has not been forgotten. It has been a process inside of the USFSA with many moments of very important discussions. So the other accomplishment is just an example, is that we helped to organize an encounter, an online encounter of Alliance for Food Sovereignty. So we are able to call all our brothers and sisters from the Latin America, Australia, Africa, and Europe, and Central Asia, and also our folks from IPC to participate with us in this conversation, which was really well attended, and we hope to continue doing this conversation in the face that at the UN process in the UN, there is an ongoing initiative of organizing the UN Food Systems Summit in New York City without the presence and the protagonism of food producers. So we are being organized ourselves. So we are watching that and try to move in that direction. The other main accomplishment has been the food sovereignty stories that Colin play a really important role in this process of organizing videos with the voices of people from the ground, from our organizers and leaders of the USFSA. The other one is that just I mentioned is what I'm doing right now is an internal assessment on racial analysis and the praxis, how we address that, and how we make sure that the voices of BIPOC people represented inside of grassroots organizations has always been elevated. So, folks, I will stop here, because I think that Dee and Giselle has way more than to offer than me. But I just want to stop here to say that that's our view. Their view is that the organization, it's a very key space. It's our home, right? It is only through collective studies, our food, and the real struggle for food sovereignty and the liberation of all of us is our classroom. That's where we are going to learn. That's where we are going to evolve. So, on the behalf of our collective of the U.S. Food Sovereignty Alliance, thank you so much for the time, and Colin, I pass the word to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Saulo. Really, valuable to have the USFSA historically and politically situated as you did, and then to share some of the dynamics and ways of organizing, some of the kind of wins, and it's really nice introduction to the work of the USFSA. Before I'm gonna hand it over to Dee and to Gisèle in a second, but I forgot to mention two things. Of course, I should have written this down, but I also wanted to just say that one of the reasons why we organized this was because the Land Workers Alliance, which is the union of peasant and farm workers in the UK that are linked to the global food sovereignty movement. They were really curious about how things are being organized in the USFSA because they've been hearing lots of the dynamics and were curious about it. And it kind of led to this idea of broadening it a bit more and inviting the Canadian movement in. And so I just wanted to acknowledge the Land Workers Alliance and their role in setting this up. The other thing, and I know that this has been shared in the chat already, but there's a webpage that I set up for the session where I'm posting all different links that Saulo has mentioned, to the history document, to the global processes. Again, it'll be shared a number of times in the chat, so you can check it out. And if you have different ways you can keep in touch with people, social media links for Saulo, for food sovereignty, the U.S. Food Sovereignty Alliance, etc. So keep an eye there. We'll keep posting things as we go along. So now I'm going to pass it over first to Dee, and just what we'd like Dee to do is to reflect on Saulo's kind of experiences that he shared with your own understanding. Obviously, organizing at a national level comes with its complexities and its challenges and its opportunities. So curious to hear a little bit about what's been happening in the UK, what your experience of it is, and some insights into what's going on in the world that you are moving through in the UK.
Okay, thank you, Saulo, for sharing that. I mean, immediate thought was, wow, in the UK we have a lot of work to do. And that's not saying that we haven't been doing good work. We describe ourselves as a movement, but actually I think we're more of an alliance. We're an alliance of NGOs, of individuals, of academics, and sort of farmers. And we have been working, I think, to decolonize our movement, because the food sovereignty movement in the UK, and I would say in Europe, has not been inclusive. And that was one of the main reasons why I personally joined, to try and disrupt that and to try and bring decolonization to the agenda. So for me, I've come in with all these questions, how do we decolonize our food? Is that framework of food sovereignty actually suitable to a Western, audience, Western worldview, especially knowing that we in the UK, we're the mother country. We're the, architects of the industrial food system. We're the architects of racism. We're the architects of, a lot of different things. So I think the work that we have been doing over the last few years within our alliance of people is examining, sort of peeling back all those layers around what decolonization would mean. The majority of our country is urban. So how do we bring urbanites with us? Because we don't have enough farmers to actually drive a movement. So how do we bring urban people, eaters, those most disaffected, along with us? And so that's been our work, and most of that has been cited within the Land Workers Alliance, which emerged actually from the very first food sovereignty gathering here. And there are things that we can celebrate about what we have achieved here. So as I said, Land Workers Alliance as one, and the amazing work that Land Workers Alliance do in terms of lobbying, and achieving sort of change at the policy level and in terms of practice. Again, we have sort of the land justice movement that has emerged, and that too has become, you know, less of a movement and more of an alliance of different organizations and groups doing work around land justice. So Lion, Land in Our Names, which has a reparative justice worldview, and you know, it is black led, and the people's food land policy, which is based on a people's food policy, which is another thing that, you know, that came out of the sort of food sovereignty movement here. So we have a lot of things that, you know, that we should be proud of, but we can't sit back on our laurels. Food sovereignty is ongoing work. And for me, the main part of that is around challenging challenging the power that sort of dominates our food system, challenging our consumption and consumption patterns, you know, that are influenced by this sort of neo-colonial sort of industrial food system, but also the other things that are part of decolonization. So the anti-oppression work, so the anti-racism and the anti-patriarchy and all the other anti-oppression work that needs to happen. As part of that, one of the things that I thought that we needed to convene was Black food sovereignty. All right, we needed to convene people who can give their own viewpoint in a safe space. So that emerged after years of discussion. We now have the beginnings of a Black food sovereignty movement who are working alongside Land Worker Alliance and other organizations. And it is about centering the most marginalized, the most disaffected, and to seek that liberation and abolition. But for us, it's also about reclaiming and claiming space and forging those spaces of divergence, disruption, and make that radical change and to move forward into new and uncharted territory. And we can only do that by co-creation. Right? We cannot do it by ourselves. You know, we are racially minoritized here in the UK and in Europe, so we cannot do it by ourselves. And for me, you know, Black food sovereignty and food sovereignty generally has love and joy at its core. And it is racial justice, it is food justice, it is climate justice, it is ecological justice, it is gender, it is economic justice, it is disability justice, it is queer, non-binary and trans justice. You know, it literally has to be intersectionality, self-determination, democracy, and liberation. And I think I'll hand you back to Colin, or I think we're going to move on to Gisèle.
There we go. Great. As usual, Dee, you've blown us away with the amazing articulation of your experiences. Yeah, and I think the in my experience, all of the movements have a lot to. There's so much to do, right? So much work, and there are different kind of stages and phases and ebbs and flows. And I think this notion of a reflexive movement that sees itself and understands how oppression and racism and all the different forms of oppression actually manifest within the movement, and reacting to that and addressing that directly. I know it's something that is happening in all of the movements that all three of the kind of UK, US, and Canadian food sovereignty movements. So really great insights that you've provided. I'm going to hand it over to Gisèle to give you a kind of sense of what's happening in Canada. Thanks, Gisèle.
Haucha, merci. Thank you. Obrigada to Saulo. I wanted to start with a Musqueam word, Haucha. Thank you. Raise my hands to all of the speakers and to Colin for having invited me to address you today. I wanted to start with Musqueam language because I am calling you from Musqueam territory in Greater Vancouver on the outskirts in Richmond. And the Musqueam people, since time immemorial, long before the Europeans ever arrived, have been the land of the custodians of these lands and waters. And they are a very interesting community as well. They intermarried with Chinese railway workers, gold prospectors, etc. And so it's a story of all of these interrelationships, and we are all interconnected. Ultimately, I think that is something we've all been understanding, particularly over the past year. I would like to start by saying how this session is resonating with everything that we are doing at Food Secure Canada, which is a national network from coast to coast to coast in this colonial space called Canada, which has several layers of colonization. I personally am of French Canadian and Indian ancestry, not Indigenous, but from India. And that, so we do question, in a way, these frameworks that guide the formation of our work and our institutions, but nevertheless, wanted to acknowledge that we are very much working towards this vision of food security and food sovereignty, and are an organization that has existed legally, of course, British colonial law, since 2006. But I want to say how much this resonates in terms of Saulo's framing, historical framing, because the organization I now represent as executive director actually has its roots in people's mobilizations that started long before the legal creation of our organization. One example is the People's Food Commission in the late 70s and early 80s. I don't know if that's familiar to our audience, but these were consultations, again, from coast to coast to coast. My French-Canadian side, I have to say, though, they were mostly in English. So there is a whole francophone discourse around food sovereignty, which is a bit different and which we need to honor. But that process resulted in a report being created called The Land of Milk and Money. And I can share that link to that in the chat to that report, which identified a lot of problems with the food system and a lot of the intersectionalities that all of the speakers have addressed today in terms of who has power, in terms of the role of women, environmental impact, Indigenous peoples, how, the systems of control. Subsequently, in the late 90s, perhaps also because of all of the social movements around food sovereignty, but also a lot of the UN processes that we're seeing today, there were a number of conferences, particularly at Ryerson University, that led to an informal network, or the desire to create a network, a bit like the US Food Sovereignty Alliance. And eventually that resulted in the creation of a formal organization, which I now represent, which was founded in 2006. So that is my first, nutshell historical sketch. Soon after this organization was created, there was a parallel people's food policy process, which was started. That resulted, again, a bit like the People's Food Commission, cross-country dialogue, kitchen table talks, resulting in the publication of a report or a policy action plan called Resetting the Table, which guided was adopted as a policy platform by our organization, and conditioned our work over the years in terms of organizing, networking, in terms of advocacy, at the level of the federal government. We also, again, these are all colonial constructs, but there are provincial sister organizations, there are municipal networks and organizations. There's a indigenous food sovereignty movement, which in many ways was as part of the People's Food Policy process. And there is now an emerging, extremely exciting Black food sovereignty movement that I think has roots that go way back, but that is emerging much more strongly. A recent conference in Toronto on that topic. Il y a beaucoup de travail en français, but I'm not going to speak to you in French, but there's a lot of work happening in French, mostly in Quebec, but also in other parts of the country. I just want to also have a pause, and what I'm hoping we can discuss is to what extent COVID-19 is a watershed transformation movement in terms of the food system and in terms of these broader social and economic challenges that I think we all care about. Shortly after the lockdown, within a few months, we published a policy action plan called Growing Resilience and Equity, which was nourished by civil society proposals that were being made from across the food movement, which I've been active since 1991, roughly, but also from other sister social movements, and which we see as an evergreen document. I would encourage you we have a copy of that on our website in English and French. Shortly after, of course, you had the tragic events that really brought to the forefront the importance of the perspective of Black food sovereignty activists. So this is yet another transition that is taking place. Our own organization has had assemblies every few years, very large gatherings like in the US. At our gathering in 2018, there were concerns raised about, again, the voices of Black, Indigenous people of color. So this has been something that our organization, particularly over the past few years, and particularly since I joined about 18 months ago, has been a real core focus of our learning and our growth. And I have to say, even for me personally, even though I feel as though I've struggled against racism, colonialism, Francophone rights since I was 15 years old in the 80s, is still a huge learning and transformative opportunity for myself personally, for everyone that we work with in our organization. So one of the links that I have suggested in the to Colin and the organizers that we share is we had a similar to this gathering, the Oxford conference that we are all participating in. We also had an online gathering called Cultivating Change on food systems transformation. And we centered the voices of Black, Indigenous, and peoples of color in both English and French. Didn't do quite as much in French as we would have liked, but it was a step forward in terms of really trying to turn things around, because a lot of these challenges are extremely subtle. And I think I'd like to, there's the obvious challenges, but there's the subtle worldview type issues, or perhaps not so subtle now, that I think we are all struggling with as we try to change ourselves, change our institutions, change our movements. And, you know, those are sort of I think the internal issues that I would like to see us talk about if we have time during the discussion. Is it really us and them, or are we all kind of interconnected? And is this a moment for some deep change? Yes, there's the risk of co-optation, but if we look at other social movements, I can't help feeling that we are at a crossroads where there is really a unique opportunity or window to make some big transformative change at a global level, and there is a recognition of the need for that deep systems change for the sake of human health, for the sake of the environment, for the sake of social justice, etc. So perhaps I'll leave it at that. Maybe I'll just leave with one story at the end. At the closing plenary of Cultivating Change, we had a wonderful session where we had Elizabeth Mpofu, I understand, is speaking at this conference as well, the representative of La Via Campesina, who was speaking along with others, a number of very prominent speakers who are involved with this conference, Raj Patel, Jose Barrero, who's a Cuban indigenous Taino, who is now in the so-called US, married into a Haudenosaunee or Mohawk family. And, you know, at the exact same time, there was another big e-conference happening in Canada where Agnes Kalibata was speaking. And so this was an interesting irony of those competing visions of the future, of where do we go. And I think what we can think of is the numbers of people who are involved and who care about these topics and these approaches that we are all working together to move forward on. So I'm an optimist. I will leave it at that, despite the difficulties of this time. I'm an optimist, and I look forward to the discussion period, and I look forward to keep in touch with all of my fellow speakers and with all of you participating. Thank you so much. Haucha again.
Thank you so much, Gisèle. That's, again, a nice way to bring it around back to Canada. It's where I'm from. It's really nice to hear kind of the happenings of Food Secure Canada. I'm, you know, we have such a little amount of time for this session. After all that, there's so much to talk about. It's unbelievable. You know, like thinking about the similarities, the kind of questions that you've each raised, like each of you had either explicit or implied questions. I'm gonna, and we have, you know, who knows how many people out there listening that are posting comments right now. I'm just gonna point people towards, can you share my screen, Josh? Is it possible? So we set up this Mentimeter thing, which is a link to a page where you can post your comments, your questions, your takeaways. And so you can see here, can everybody see that? Let's see. Yeah. You can see here that there's a website, and could someone post it on the chat where there's a link there, but you can also go to www.menti.com and enter this passcode in 6973090. And I'll trust that it's going to be posted in the chat, and those who want to find it can. And you can see here, it gives you a little thing where you can enter in some comments and questions, and then it'll post them up here. This is kind of the outcome of it, which will then go onto the project with this website. You can see it's already being posted here. So everybody who wants to see the comments and questions from the audience can just go to agroecologynow.com/ORFC bellybeast, which will be posted in the comments. But if you want to add something, and I think probably more comments than questions, because we're not going to be able to address many questions from the audience here, unfortunately. What I'd like to do now is just have a quick closing round from each of the panelists, because I think that it would be nice just to have a little bit of, somebody's calling me, a little bit of a crosstalk, you know, in the last, and some closing thoughts. And I'm gonna maybe start with how can we do it? Maybe we'll start with Saulo, and then go Dee and Gisèle again, just because Saulo's had the longest break in between talking here. So I'll turn it back to you, and you can, you know, again, there were lots of implied and explicit questions posed by each of the panelists, but I'll leave it to each of you to decide how you want to close this off. Thank you. We have 5 minutes, so please keep your comments to, you know, a minute and a half.
Sure. First of all, thank you, Dee, Gisèle, and Colin. I think it was good to hear, at least have a chance to get a glimpse of how you guys are articulating your struggles and your analysis. You know, as a USFSA, we are very much interested to build an alliance and communication with both of your organizations. So let's keep talking, and let's keep connected, and continue learning together. So thank you so much for the support and the opportunity.
Dee. You're on mute, Dee.
Should know that by now. Within the sort of global movement, we say build, resist, transform. And I would like to continue building across the waters and building with newer organizations and other movements. So like the CSA movement, yeah, which is growing in the UK, Farms to Feed Us, yeah, that is literally bringing people along, and add something else. We need to repair, right? Repair in terms of reparations, repair in terms of healing. Yeah, that's me.
I would just like to echo everything my co-presenters just said. And I also want to say, I know there is cynicism about the UN system and the rest of it, but we have the Sustainable Development Goals. There's 10 years. And those goals, you know, Sustainable Development Goal 2, zero hunger, improved nutrition, sustainable food systems. That's actually the mandate of our organization. If we can get organized, can we move the needle? We want progress. I will be 64 years old in 2030, and I want change on the ground. I don't want talking. I want actual change on the ground, and we need the wisdom of all our communities that we work with to make meaningful transformation, or else the world's blowing up. I mean, it's going to go either way. So we have to do this. We have no choice.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for all of your closing comments. I'll maybe close the session with a few things. Yeah, I think, Gisèle, you know, you raised the one issue, COVID, the current political historic context is, you know, unique, and it's only going to evolve further along with all the other ecological and economic crises we face in the context of the ongoing crisis of oppression, racism, patriarchy. And so this political, we don't have time to really dive into what this political moment means, but I think that's super important question. This is one instance of a number of examples I've seen recently where different movements from different places exchange, understand similarities, to think about. I know, for example, the African Food Sovereignty Alliance, AFSA, got together with USFSA a few months ago to begin a discussion. I know that the Neoliberal Europe movement, which is the food sovereignty movement in Europe, is connected, of course, with the UK movement, but also with USFSA. And there's lots of opportunities for that. And hopefully this is just one step along that way. And this is, I mean, this is just a taster for everybody out there who's listening, and for us, and a nice way to introduce one another. And hopefully we can follow this up, and we will have a debrief after this amongst the panelists to see what might be possible and how we might move forward. Again, for people who want to follow up, all of our kind of ways to link up with us are posted on that Agroecology Now webpage. If the organizers of this panel can send that around in the chat again, feel free to get in touch with us. Thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of the conference. And thanks so much to the panelists and to the ORFC and to the Land Workers Alliance for being involved in putting this together. I think it was a great session, lots of ideas, lots of questions, and we'll all go forward inspired and ready to take whatever next step we're moving on to. Thank you.
Great.